Hi, my name is Kira Yakubov. I'm a licensed individual, couples, and sex therapist. So in today's video, I wanted to talk about mismatched sex drives. Some things I'll go over today is the reasons why it might be happening and some tips to help you and your partner navigate through this process. And so I picked this topic because it's actually one of the most common issues that a lot of couples face. And that's because it's actually pretty rare for a couple to have similar or the same sex drive. It just doesn't happen as often. And so our sex drive is on a spectrum, right? So when one partner has a higher sex drive than the other, that can cause tension in the relationship if they don't adapt to it. And so our sex drive can fluctuate throughout our whole lifespan. And that could really change from week to week, month to month, year, or certain life circumstances, right? So some things that might be affecting it is if you or your partner are on a certain medication, if there's a lot of stress and anxiety going on in your life, physical or medical issues going on with your body, and also the dynamic and connection you feel within the relationship with your partner can actually play a pretty big role on your sex drive too. So this is not gender specific, right? This can happen to anybody. It can happen in any sexual orientation or any type of relationship. And so this usually comes out in one of a few ways, right? So the first way is that in the beginning of relationships, there's typically like this honeymoon phase where you're infatuated with each other and you can't keep your hands off one another. And it seems like both your sex drives are pretty high and at the same place, right? So it doesn't even seem like an issue. And once that phase is over, or you're moving through that phase into a long term relationship, you kind of settle into a new routine, which there's nothing wrong with. But that means that your sex drive, what you actually feel, starts to show a little bit more, right? So sometimes people are like, oh, I want to go back to the beginning. Why can't we have sex as much as we used to? Or I feel like you changed in some way. And it's not that the person changed. It could be if some of the reasons that I mentioned earlier, or that just might be where their natural sex drive is. And you couldn't really tell because now that all of those feel good hormones have kind of plateaued a little bit, you get to see where you guys really are in comparison to each other. Another issue that might come up is that early on in the relationship, you might have noticed that you or your partner had a much lower sex drive, but you might have overlooked it and thought there's so many better qualities in this person that it's not that big of a deal. And then, or that it might change over time, right? And then as time goes on, it doesn't change. And so now you're left feeling kind of frustrated and either mad at yourself because you knew kind of in the beginning, or it just causes a lot of tension within the relationship. So some tips that can really help is number one, communication, right? That is key in basically every issue or relationship, is that you have to be able to communicate with one another. And it's not just talking or yelling at each other, but it's actually listening and empathizing with your partner, right? So it's difficult for each of you to maneuver this, right? The partner who has a higher sex drive, they might feel rejected, right? If they're initiating or wanting sex and you don't, then they might feel like you're not attracted to them. They might take it personally, and that can kind of lower their self esteem and take a hit at their ego. And they might not initiate anymore, or they might find that they're really frustrated with you and they're frustrated that their needs aren't being met, and they might be expressing it and there's no changes in the relationship, right? And it's just kind of empathizing and understanding that frustration and what that might feel like. And then on the flip side is empathizing with your partner who has a lower sex drive, and that they also might feel some guilt or shame come up that they're not able to meet this important need for their partner, right? Or they might also feel like everything's about sex. It's all surrounding this topic, and you're not able to kind of appreciate or recognize other parts of who they are and their personality, and maybe some really good parts of the relationship outside of that. So learning to just kind of understand where your partner's coming from is going to be super important in this process. And so just being able to talk about it. I know it's tough and it might feel uncomfortable, but we have to have these uncomfortable conversations to move through and be able to be closer to our partner. And so the second tip I would say is learning about what each of you need to be in the mood, right? So that can also look like your energy levels. Like if one or both of you are working or you're extremely tired, maybe thinking about, okay, when do I have the most energy? When am I most likely to be open to having some intimate time with my partner, right? So that way your partner is on the same page and knows what to expect. And if you're exhausted at night, then you guys can try in the morning, right? Like before work or on the weekends, if that's the best time when one or both of you are feeling the most relaxed, right? So exploring together when is the best time for you physically to be up for it. And the other part of setting the mood is also, it's not just when one person's feeling horny and then they ask their partner, hey, do you want to have sex? And then that's it, right? There's so much more involved in that process. And some people, and particularly women, they don't always have this spontaneous sex drive that just pops up out of nowhere, right? Typically, they have to feel connected to their partner, they have to feel emotionally close to them, and that might look like sending texts throughout the day, sharing how much you miss them or you care about them, or letting them know that you appreciate them, right? It's working on the relationship to feel close and intimate, and that actually helps extend to the sexual part of your relationship, right? So it's also important to think about what each of you need on your own. So exploring your own bodies. It's not just your partner's responsibility to turn you on, especially if they don't know how to turn you on because you don't know how to turn yourself on, right? So it's kind of taking responsibility of setting some time aside for you time, personal time to explore your body, explore what feels good, thinking about certain sensations or touches or different parts of your body that you enjoy being touched, right? So, what feels pleasurable for you and your partner? And then being able to come together to talk about it and share those things. Another tip is, let's say you talked about all those things and there's just coming to a compromise, right? So expanding what sex looks like and means for you and the relationship. So sex does not mean penetrative sex, right? It could be kissing, cuddling, oral sex, masturbating each other. Penetrative sex can be a part of that. Anal sex, cuddling, arousal, right? Like it is so more expansive than just this one act. And so, if we allow ourselves to be open to thinking of it that way, it could be really helpful to take more time to explore each other and to experiment together, right? So, let's say the partner who has a higher sex drive, they ask their partner or they try to initiate some kind of sexual interaction with them or activity. And so we never want the other partner to feel pressure or do something that they don't want to do, right? It has to be consensual. It's always important. Because then if we're doing that or pressuring them or guilting them into it, that creates a whole other negative feedback loop that we can talk about in a different video. But for this sake, in terms of compromising, right? It could be that maybe the one partner is feeling aroused and horny and the other one isn't, and that's okay. And you might be able to talk about like maybe the one partner masturbates while you are kissing them or caressing them or talking to them or you're masturbating them, right? Like it could look different. It doesn't have to be the typical sexual way of going about it. It could just be based on pleasure, right? So if you're in the mood for pleasure and your partner isn't in the mood to receiving it, then they can be part of the act of you receiving pleasure. So that could be watching you, kissing, all those things, right? So allowing that to be an option. And also masturbating yourself, right? So if you just naturally have a much higher sex drive and your partner's really not around or they don't want to, utilizing masturbation on your own too is pretty important. So another big tip is maintaining physical affection and intimacy outside of sex altogether, right? So because if we create this association that you guys are only touching or kissing or being intimate in that way when you are about to have sex, and if you're not having sex frequently, then it's off the table. That also takes away the feeling of being close to you and touching and feeling loved and appreciated, right? So making sure that you guys are maintaining kisses and hugs and caresses, cuddles that you just do just for the sake of feeling close to one another. It's really important. And another thing that might come up is maybe after you've tried some of these things, you might reach out to a sex therapist. It is a very common issue that I see couples, that I treat couples, and is definitely manageable. And there's a lot of ways to go about it. So there's no need to struggle through this or feel kind of hopeless because there's a lot of things that you and your partner can do. So I hope this was helpful. And if you have any questions or if you want to see more videos like this, you can follow me on Instagram at unfiltered_girl talk and my website at www.kiriakubov.com. Thanks, guys.